Well, you may or may not have seen the premiere of Star Wars Rebels at this point. You may or may not have heard of Star Wars Rebels. I, for one, have. And the reason I'm doing this video review now instead of Friday night is because, well, partially for time reasons. I don't really know how much time I'll have Friday night, but you might be thinking, well, how can I possibly have seen the episode already? Well, it turns out that the premiere of Star Wars Rebels was made available online before its actual TV premiere date, if provided you actually have the service of, I believe it's Watch Disney XD or something. It's basically available on Disney XD website. I think what it is what it amounts to. So I was able to watch it, and hopefully give my review to anyone wondering whether they should tune in on Friday night. Which Friday night I believe is also the premiere of Legend of Korra. Although personally, I know this is going to make me out to be a bit of a heretic among geekdom, but I actually have more hope for Star Wars Rebels than I do for Legend of Korra. Now that actually brings me to the premise of Star Wars Rebels. Star Wars Rebels, in case you don't know, is kind of a spiritual successor to Star Wars The Clone Wars, which is, the series that was on for 5 to 6 years on Cartoon Network. But when Disney bought Star Wars, its future was basically uncertain until Disney finally, until the plug was finally pulled. And while they were actually working on season 6, the plug was pulled, and a new show was announced for Disney XD called Star Wars Rebels, which instead of taking place in the Clone Wars, it was going to take place during the 20-year time span between episode 3 and 4 of the movie series. So it's going to take place during the reign of the Galactic Empire, approximately, I think they said 15 years after Revenge of the Sith. So approximately a few years before A New Hope. So it's going to focus on this ragtag group of freedom fighters or rebels, and it's apparently going to focus on how the rebellion comes to be, which, from a conceptual standpoint, I was kind of confused about, considering that story was already done, and done reasonably well in The Force Unleashed, so I don't really know if they're retconning that or not, because that is official LucasArts property, or at least I thought it was. But, I digress. Star Wars Rebels, I will say this. Based on the pilot, it has a lot of problems, or not really a lot of problems, but some big problems that hold it back from greatness right now. But it has potential, and I really mean that. It's not nearly as dark, or at least not right away, it's not nearly as dark as the Clone Wars could get at first, but if you remember, the Clone Wars was not exactly dark in the beginning either. And right away, what I can appreciate about this show is that it really wants to get back to the spirit of old school Star Wars, which I'm sure a lot of longtime fans will probably appreciate. People who were kind of getting used to the Clone Wars and how dark that could get, I don't really think we'll gravitate towards this show right away, unless some serious tonal changes are made. But maybe they shouldn't be made, because right away this show has kind of a fundamental disadvantage, or a fundamental task of trying to differentiate itself from the Clone Wars, because like I said, it is sort of the spiritual successor. A lot of the people who worked on the Clone Wars are now working on this show, with the addition of, Simon Kinberg and the guy, or one of the guys who worked on the Spectacular Spider-Man, which was well received. I never watched it, but basically the story revolves around this kid named Ezra, I believe his name is. He's this street rat. He's this thief who basically has no parents. He's basically Aladdin. That's what he is, which already not a particular good impression, because I hate Aladdin. I know, I'm sorry. I don't like Aladdin. I don't like him as a character. But Ezra, he's this street thief on this distant planet that I forget the name of, and he comes across this group of contract rebels, as it were. I mean, they work for money. They steal things for money. They disrupt Imperial plans for money. And they are led by Kanan, this guy named Kanan, who is one of the last of the Jedi, which, given how much expanded universe material has been done, and given how many spin-offs have been done, that take place after Order 66. You would think that Order 66 would have been more thorough, but apparently not. Apparently there are still Jedi running around all over the place. But you know, Kanan is one of the last of the Jedi. He doesn't really flaunt himself as a Jedi anymore. I mean, he uses a blaster. He keeps his lightsaber hidden. And he's joined by his pilot, who is the same species as Ayla Secura. She's I forget what they're called too. I know I'm a little rusty on Star Wars lore, but the pilot named Hera, a big furry brute guy named Zeb, a chick in Mandalorian armor named Sabine, and a little astro droid, a little astromech, who's basically a more irritable version of R2-D2. That's basically the gist. Now Ezra, as you would probably guess, falls in with these guys, and they go on tons of adventures together, blah, blah, blah. This pilot basically shows them meeting, shows Ezra going on his first mission together, and basically the overarching arc of this pilot episode, this 44-minute pilot episode, Spark of Rebellion, is Ezra really coming to terms with, hey, maybe there is possibly a cause for me to fight for other than my own. Maybe it's not just every man for himself. And then he learns that, and I actually thought that was pretty well handled. I thought it was a pretty gradual progression. It's not just, you know, drop of the hat, he switches ideologies. Yeah, right away, the good stuff. The voice acting is actually pretty good. The guy who plays Ezra, I don't really know his name, but he did a good job. He was fairly appealing. He wasn't really too arrogant to the point where I didn't like him. And that was really my problem with Aladdin. I know I'm in a minority on that, but Ezra, he was confident and full of himself, just enough to be endearing while never really going into an area of being obnoxious. Freddie Prinze Jr. was actually really good as Kanan, and that was I know Freddie Prinze Jr. gets kind of a bad rap from some parties for you know, being kind of limited. I myself have picked on him in the past, but let's face it, Scooby-Doo, he did his best with what he was given. Scooby-Doo, he was not the right guy for Fred. I'm sorry. He did his best. He still didn't do a very good job, but he did his best as Fred. But yeah, he actually does a really good job. He's probably my favorite character up to this point. He's the most interesting character, to be sure, because this is a guy who's on the surface this brash, roguish type Han Solo character, but in reality he used to be a Jedi, and I'm actually really interested to see if this show kind of starts to peel back his layers and kind of shows us, you know, how he progressed into what he is now. If he really was like all the other serene, mystical Jedi, and you know, had to go through this adjustment period to get to attain the attitude that he has now. I don't really know, but yeah, he did a really good job. Tia Sircar, I think that's how you say her name, who I'm not really too familiar with her work, but honestly, the only thing I've ever seen her in is the really disappointing Walking with Dinosaurs movie. She did a really good job as Sabine. Although Sabine, at least initially, I think this is the least developed out of the entire team, aside from the droid. She seems to have the least personality up to this point. But again, we have an entire show ready for us. So hopefully we get to see more of her in terms of personality. Hera actually has some fairly entertaining repertoire with Kanan. From what I can gather, they're lovers, so Hera kind of functions as his nagging wife. Although, again, never really becoming annoying. And Zeb, at this point, I think is a little bit too one-note. It's Steve Bloom. By the way, Hera was voiced by Vanessa Marshall, and Steve Bloom voices Zeb. So they do have some professional voice actors in this cast. It's not just celebrities. But Steve Bloom voices Zeb, and he's basically putting on this very gruff, almost Ray Winstone-esque Cockney accent. And like I said, he's a little bit one-note. Like and hope to see more of his personality. There was only so much you can do in a pilot episode. I was just saying this about the Gotham pilot. While that was a very good pilot, I did think it was sort of hampered by the introductory nature that I think is very difficult to avoid in any pilot. And this was no exception, because you had to introduce these characters, you had to get them together, while at the same time you had to give, seeing as this is a kids cartoon show, you had to kind of abide by that format and their expectations that are asked of you in kind of trying to meet the audience for that format, because there had to be a fair amount of action scenes, blah blah blah. So I understand, hence why the episode felt a little rushed. I didn't really think they took enough time to let us digest certain things as they could, but you know, when they got something right, they got it really right. For example, when during the scenes between Kanan and Ezra, and as Kanan's past is revealed as a Jedi, a twist which was unfortunately spoiled by the slew of promotional material, but I digress. When we actually start to get deeper into the characters and the characters have moments, they do let the moments play. I just wish we would had more of them instead of, you know, action scene upon action scene. But again, I think you are somewhat limited by the expectations of that are set out for you. We are trying to make an action. I mean, Disney comes to you, make an action show, and Dave Filoni and Simon Kinberg and the guy from Spectacular Spider-Man are like, okay. So in addition to that, we don't really get too much into the villains. Really, the only villain we get this time around, and I was kind of disappointed, really the only villain is this this Imperial officer named Callus, which, you know, Star Wars has always had a pretty difficult time with making their villains pretty transparent. Really, you don't go to Star Wars to have some unexpected twist in the when it comes to the villainy. You know who's a good guy and who's the bad guy. I think that's part of the charm. But yeah, Callus, he's this very snooty, very gruff Imperial officer with these huge mutton chops, and you know, he functions well as an episodic villain, but there's not really a whole lot to him, unfortunately. He just seems kind of like generic Imperial officer at this point. But who we did get at the end of the episode was the Inquisitor, who is the agent of the dark side, as it were. I mean, he looks like a pinhead from Hellraiser, and he's voiced by Jason Isaacs, who, if you don't know, Jason Isaacs is awesome. He's probably the best actor on this show. He was the bad guy in The Patriot. He was Captain Hook in the live-action version of Peter Pan, which, now that I think about it, has more than a few issues, but Jason Isaacs was awesome in it. He was Lucius Malfoy in Harry Potter. We don't have to talk about his role in Abduction, but Jason Isaacs voices the Inquisitor. We only had him get one or two lines, but he sold those two lines. And again, this show has drawn me in, not just by its gradual reveal of the villains, but also the high adventure aspect. I mean, this is supposed to be a very swashbuckling show, very much in the style of the old school Star Wars, which I think that's going to be one of the advantages of that this show has, is that it's actually kind of refreshing to see Star Wars have fun again. And the animation, I actually think things flowed pretty smoothly. This animation, in terms of how the characters moved, trumps the Clone Wars, in my opinion. The Clone Wars, as good as the animation could get, sometimes it was a little stilted, I will admit. But this animation, the characters, I mean, there was always something moving on screen, but it never felt like keys jingling in the faces of the kid audience. It really comes across more as attention to detail than keys jingling. Or at least that's the way it came off to me. The animation just looks very fluid. The character designs, it's kind of taken me a while to get used to. Some of them really work. I like the character designs of the main crew, for the most part, and I think a lot of that has to do with the very smooth animation, the very beautiful animation at times. But other character designs, I think, are just vastly inferior to the Clone Wars, and I'm not going to compare this to the Clone Wars because, like Gotham, I think this is really trying to develop its own identity. But the Wookiees, the Wookiees are god awful. I mean, they just look so terrible in this. I mean, they honestly look like they're melting. I mean, they look like someone drew a watercolor painting of a Wookiee and then poured additional water all over it to where they just look like this brown slop. That's what the Wookiees look like. They look like gnarled turds is what they look like, and which perplexes me because think back. I'm sorry to go here again. Think back to the Clone Wars and how good the Wookiees looked in the Clone Wars. I mean, remember when Chewbacca guest starred on the show? Remember when they had all the Wookiees come in and save the day on the Clone Wars? They looked good. They had texture. I don't know why these Wookiees look so bad. I mean, is it the, for lack of a better term, Disneyfication of the animation style? I don't know, because this animation style, like I said, is not nearly as dark. I mean, it's a lot more colorful and brighter than the Clone Wars, but did the designs necessarily have to suffer? I could understand wanting to go for a slightly more cartoonish and more fun and cheerful looking design, but the Wookiees, that's no excuse for how bad the Wookiees look. So yeah, like I said, oh, and even the music, I believe is by the same guy who did the Clone Wars, but it includes more of the classic Star Wars themes, which again I think helps this, can potentially help this show in recapturing the feel of old Star Wars. So yeah, fairly solid beginning. Again, major problems, and I'm still not entirely sold on some aspects, but overall I think it has promise. I really do. Because think back, the Clone Wars when it started out was not very good either. I will be honest. There were occasionally good episodes in the beginning. You know, Rookies was fantastic, but yeah, Ahsoka was very annoying in the beginning. She was not annoying toward the end, but you know, like I said, I think there's nearly always room for improvement, and the show is no exception to that. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on Star Wars Rebels, the pilot episode, Spark of Rebellion. It's good, but not great yet.